It was a cold March night in Lurgan, a town in Northern Ireland. 3 young Republicans left the local Royal Ulster Constabulary barracks, walking into the dark, their breath visible in the still air. They were marked men, watched, known, and hunted. Moments later, the quiet shattered. Gunfire erupted from the shadows, bullets tearing through the night. Masked gunmen from the Ulster Volunteer Force, a loyalist paramilitary group, had opened fire. The men dived for cover as the street lit up with muzzle flashes, a storm of violence lasting only seconds, but echoing for decades. When the gunfire stopped, the ground was slick with blood. 2 of the men were wounded, and 1 lay dead on the pavement. As he drew his last breaths, he uttered words that would haunt Northern Ireland for decades. "We were let out to be set up." Within hours, whispers of collusion spread like wildfire. Claims that the loyalist gunmen had been tipped off by British security forces. For many in the Republican community, it wasn't just an ambush, it was an execution, sanctioned by the state. In the heart of Northern Ireland, where the line between war and peace was little more than a flicker in the smoke, one name echoed through the shadows: Colin Duffy. Born in 1968 to a Catholic family in Lurgan, County Armagh, Duffy's life would become a story of rebellion, survival, and unrelenting controversy. He grew up in the heart of a storm, a childhood shaped by the chaos and bloodshed of the Troubles. Sectarian hatred, political violence, and generations of grief hung heavy over the town of Lurgan, where British patrols and paramilitary gunfire were as common as the church bells. It was an environment that hardened everyone it touched, forging a boy who would one day become one of the most polarizing figures to emerge from Northern Ireland's dark and divided history. Lurgan itself was a town carved in 2, Catholics on one side, Protestants on the other, with fear and suspicion filling the space in between. Bombings rattled windows, British soldiers patrolled the streets. Every corner carried a quiet threat. In the 1970s and 1980s, neutrality was a luxury few could afford. In a world where choosing a side was a matter of survival, young Colin Duffy made his choice early, and there would be no turning back. From a young age, Colin Duffy was swept into the storm of Republican resistance. In the streets of Lurgan, the Irish Republican Army wasn't just a militant force, it was a symbol. To many young Catholics, it stood as the only shield against a government they believed had turned its back on them, a banner of defiance in a land that offered little justice. By his teenage years, Duffy had taken the leap. He joined the provisional IRA, the armed vanguard of the Republican movement, and soon became active within Sinn Féin, its political counterpart. The deeper he went, the more unwavering his convictions became. He spoke out for Irish unity, not as an abstract dream, but as a moral duty, a cause worth fighting and dying for. But that belief came at a price. It marked him as a target for the British state and for the loyalist gunmen who patrolled the other side of the divide. March 7th, 1990, a night that would change Colin Duffy's life forever. After signing bail at the RUC barracks in Lurgan, Duffy walked into the darkness alongside fellow Republicans Sam Marshall and Tony McCoy. They hadn't gone far when the quiet streets erupted. From the shadows, masked gunmen from the Ulster Volunteer Force opened fire, leaving Duffy and McCoy wounded and Sam Marshall dead. Within minutes, soldiers and police swarmed the scene, but to locals, their presence felt less like protection and more like confirmation of a setup. Whispers spread, collusion, betrayal, revenge. That night became more than an ambush. It became a symbol of the chaos that still haunted Northern Ireland, where truth and violence walked hand in hand through the dark. One name cast a long shadow over the ambush: Robin Jackson. To those who knew the dark underworld of loyalist paramilitaries, he was the Jackal, a ghostly figure whispered about in pubs and police reports alike, a man linked to some of the bloodiest massacres of the Troubles, yet one who somehow always slipped through the cracks of justice. Witnesses later claimed they'd seen someone matching Jackson's description near the Lurgan RUC barracks on a previous evening, the very place where Duffy, Marshall, and McCoy had signed their bail. The implication was chilling. If true, it meant the ambush had been more than coincidence. It had been orchestrated. Despite years of suspicion and rumour, no one was ever charged with Sam Marshall's murder. The attack deepened the gulf between Northern Ireland's divided communities and hardened the resolve of men like Colin Duffy, who now saw himself not as a criminal, but as a soldier in a war without rules. But the 1990 ambush was only the beginning. 5 years later, in 1995, Duffy was arrested and charged with the murder of John Linus, a former soldier in the Ulster Defence Regiment. The case ignited headlines and reopened old wounds. The prosecution's star witness was Lindsay Robb, a UVF member who claimed to have insider knowledge of the plot. For a time, his testimony threatened to seal Duffy's fate, resulting in Duffy's conviction. But Robb's credibility soon exploded when he was caught gun-running in Scotland, exposing him as both a liar and a hypocrite. With the case in ruins, Duffy walked free, his conviction quashed in appeal. To many in the Republican movement, it wasn't just an acquittal, it was vindication. Proof, they said, that the justice system had been wielded as a weapon and that Colin Duffy had survived yet another attempt to silence him. Throughout Colin Duffy's battles with the courts, one name stood firmly by his side: Rosemary Nelson. A fearless human rights lawyer, Nelson had built a reputation for defending those the system had already condemned in the court of public opinion. She took on cases others wouldn't touch, challenging the might of the state at a time when doing so could be a death sentence. But her courage made her a target. Threats poured in from loyalist groups and, chillingly, from members of the very security forces sworn to uphold the law. Then, in 1999, the threats became reality. A bomb planted beneath her car exploded outside her home, killing her instantly. The murder sent shockwaves across Northern Ireland, a brutal message to anyone who dared to stand up to the system. For Colin Duffy, it was more than a loss of a lawyer. It was the loss of an ally and a symbol of resistance. Her death hardened him further, deepening his belief that justice in Northern Ireland was an illusion reserved for one side only. But Duffy's own battles were far from over. Just 2 years after his release in 1997, he was once again thrust into the spotlight, charged with the murders of RUC constables John Graham and David Johnston, shot dead while on foot patrol in Lurgan town centre. The evidence was thin, circumstantial, inconsistent, and built largely on shaky witness testimony and forensic guesswork. Yet the case dragged on, another chapter in Duffy's long war with the state. When the charges were finally dropped, Northern Ireland was once again split down the middle. To his supporters, it was proof that Duffy was the victim of a corrupt system designed to break him. To his critics, it was just another escape for a man they believed had blood on his hands. As the millennium dawned, Northern Ireland was beginning to breathe again. The guns had mostly fallen silent, and the fragile promise of peace hung in the air. But amid this uneasy calm, one name refused to fade from the headlines: Colin Duffy. In March 2009, Duffy was arrested and charged in connection with one of the most shocking attacks of the post-Troubles era, the Messerine Barracks shooting. 2 British soldiers, Patrick Azimcar and Mark Quincy, were gunned down as they collected pizzas from a delivery driver outside the Antrim base. The attack, claimed by the real IRA, sent shockwaves through a society still trying to heal, and it came just days after police had warned of a rising threat from dissident Republicans. The case exploded into a media storm. For some, it was a grim reminder that the old war had never truly ended. For others, it was an attempt by the state to reopen wounds best left closed. The prosecution's case hinged on a single piece of evidence: a trace of Duffy's DNA found on a latex glove inside a getaway car. But the defense tore holes in the narrative, arguing that the DNA was minute, inconclusive, and far from proof of guilt. After years of legal wrangling, on January 20th, 2012, the verdict was delivered. Colin Duffy was acquitted. His co-accused, Brian Shivers, was initially convicted, only for his conviction to later collapse amid procedural failures and revelations about his terminal illness. For Duffy, it was another narrow escape in a lifetime of him, a man forever walking the line between myth and menace, freedom and fate. The Messerine trial may have ended, but Colin Duffy's time in the spotlight was far from over. On September 8, 2012, Duffy stood before a silent crowd at the funeral of Alan Ryan, a real IRA member gunned down in Dublin. As the tricolour draped the coffin, Duffy entered a fiery graveside oration, defiant, unapologetic, and unmistakably political. He hailed Ryan as a brave Irish Republican and a fearless IRA volunteer, urging continued resistance against what he called foreign interference in our country. The words reverberated far beyond the cemetery gates. To supporters, it was a call to remember the past. To critics, it was a warning, proof that the old embers of war still burned beneath Northern Ireland's uneasy peace. Then, just 2 months later, the headlines returned. On November 2nd, 2012, Duffy was arrested once again, this time accused of involvement in the murder of David Black, a prison officer ambushed and shot dead on the M1 motorway between Lurgan and Portadown. The killing, a brazen attack on a member of the security services, sent shockwaves through the country and reignited fears that the Troubles were not as far behind as many had hoped. The following year brought more charges, allegations of IRA membership and conspiring to possess firearms and explosives with intent to endanger life, relating to an alleged gun attack on PSNI vehicles in North Belfast in December 2013. As before, Duffy's defence tore into the evidence, branding it speculative and politically motivated. After 2 years behind bars awaiting trial, he was released on bail in February 2016, walking free once more, but leaving behind a storm of controversy, unanswered questions, and the lingering sense that Colin Duffy's story was not yet finished. Finally, on the 21st of March 2024, in what was described as one of Northern Ireland's longest-running trials, Duffy and co-accused Henry Fitzsimmons were acquitted on all charges after the judge ruled that the covert audio evidence did not meet the required standard. The shadow of the Troubles didn't end with Colin Duffy, it stretched across his entire family. His brothers, Paul and Damien, along with his cousin Shane, were all drawn into the same turbulent current, each facing charges linked to paramilitary activity and terrorism. Like Colin, all were ultimately acquitted, but not before enduring years of scrutiny, suspicion, and stigma. To many, the Duffys became the embodiment of a family under siege, a clan shaped, scarred, and defined by the conflict that consumed their homeland. Even today, their name carries weight in Republican circles. Colin's sister-in-law, Mandy Duffy, remains a vocal presence within SORA, the political voice of the hardline Republican movement that refuses to accept the peace settlement as the final chapter. Together, the Duffy family represents something larger than themselves, a living reminder of Northern Ireland's tangled legacy, where family, politics, and conflict remain inseparable threads in the same story. To his supporters, Colin Duffy is a symbol of resistance, a man who stood unbroken against the system they believe sought to destroy him. To his critics, he's the spectre of the past, a symbol of the violence, division, and bitterness that kept Northern Ireland bleeding for decades. His journey, from a boy growing up under the watchful eyes of British patrols in Lurgan, to a man repeatedly accused and acquitted of some of the most serious crimes of the Troubles, mirrors the contradictions of the land itself, a place forever wrestling with its own history. Colin Duffy's story is not one of endings, but of echoes. Even now, as Northern Ireland walks the uneasy path of peace, his name lingers, a reminder that not all wounds have healed, and not all battles have been laid to rest. The questions remain: can a society so deeply scarred ever truly move on? Can men like Duffy find redemption in peace after a lifetime shaped by war? And what does justice mean in a place where every truth has two sides? For decades, Colin Duffy has stood at the fault line between rebellion and reconciliation, a man as defiant as he is divisive. His life mirrors Northern Ireland itself, haunted by its past, uncertain of its future, and forever caught between the ghosts of war and the fragile promise of peace. That was it for today's video. What are your thoughts on today's topic? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see our next videos.